Hello, everyone. Today, our activity is called Mental Health 101. So, before we get started, we are going to be doing some introductions. So, my name is Jimmy. I go by pronouns he, him, his, and I'm going to be a senior at Annandale High School this fall.
Hi, my name's Deanna. I go by she, her, and I am a rising college freshman at VCU.
Hi, I'm Sabla. I go by she, her, and I'm going to be a rising senior at Robinson.
Hi, I'm Jada. I'm also she, her, and I'm going to be a rising junior at Woodson.
Okay, so the goals for today's session is one, just to kind of gain an understanding between mental wellness and its similarities to physical wellness and how those can intersect in our day-to-day lives. Mental health is a spectrum. You can have different levels of wellness, different levels of low points or high points at any point of the day. It's a spectrum. It's not always constant. And it's also important to understand these kind of complexities that come with experiencing mental illness or mental disorders.
So for the warm-up question, mental health can be really confusing and difficult to understand. And we can't always realize that mental health and physical health is actually not that different. It can be pretty similar. So our first question is going to be, who knows what it means to be sick or healthy?
I think that there aren't really set specifications, and that's one reason why it makes it so difficult. But usually when we're talking about medicine, to be sick means you're feeling unwell, something in your body is not working right, and you may not be able to function like you normally do.
Thank you, Deanna.
I feel like we associate it more with like when you tell someone like you're sick, they're just going to assume that you have like a cold or I don't know. It's like something physical usually.
There's the idea that to be sick is like, I guess like you mentioned, Jimmy, to be physical, but as we're talking about mental health and how like mental illness is like a real thing, sometimes it's important to know that it can be a process. So I guess a way to kind of differentiate between people, between like what is sick and what is healthy, at least to me, I kind of imagine it as whether or not you're able to do the things that you honestly want to do. Like, for example, if you have a broken arm, you can't use your arm because like it's broken. But let's say if you're going through a really rough spot, it may be hard for you to focus or to be motivated to do things that you want to do because like there are things going on in your life that are making that worse, or there are other parts in your life that you need to address first before being able to feel motivated again.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to go back on is the part when you said when you have a broken arm, you can't use that arm. And that reminded me of like when someone is not mentally healthy, they can't help another person until they are. And so that is one similarity.
Yeah, I think that's really important, Jada. Like that idea of like feeling like you can't fill someone else's cup until like you fill your own cup or something.
Right, like you can't pour out of an empty cup.
Mental health is something everyone has, and it is unavoidable, and it's a part of your life. It includes how you feel, think, communicate, and even act. And mental illness can be very severe. However, everyone can experience different symptoms, and it's different for every person. And so these symptoms might be really small, like, for example, breathing really quickly. And they can also be visible, like a panic attack. Sometimes you can tell more in a person, see like the stress they're in, and it is very broad basically, and we'll focus on specific examples in today's activity.
All right, so supplies for this activity. Usually this activity is something that people do in person, but we've adapted it for today to for certain situations, like right now, we're unable to see each other in person. So we'll be using a document that all of the participants can edit, and we're gonna share the template on the next slide. And then also, if you're looking for more information on how to run this activity yourself, you can access information on the Our Minds Matter website, including a facilitator guide, and the link is right here. However, for today's participants, don't worry about this. An editable document is all that you need.
Okay, so with that being said, we can get started on our activity. So for this activity, like Deanna said, you're going to need a document with two lists, one being a table or a list for physical health, and the other being a table or list for mental health. And we actually have a template that you can use. And essentially, we're going to spend some time sorting these symptoms based on how severe they are. So I think it'll make more sense when I show you the template. So like as you can see, on the left side here, we have some physical symptoms of a cut. So we chose specific instances of physical health and mental health because both are just so broad. So on the left side, you can see some things that have to do with a cut, and we're gonna sort them from least severe to most severe. And on the right side, you're gonna see some symptoms of anger, and we're also gonna sort them from least severe to most severe. So you can either collaborate as a group and have everyone type and sort it out, or in this case, we're gonna actually choose one person to type while we have this discussion together. So do you have any volunteers?
I can type. I'll do it.
Thank you, Deanna, for being the scribe.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm just gonna read through all these first. So we have paper cut on eyelid, bleeding artery, sprained hamstring, broken bone, paper cut on lip, rolled ankle, paper cut on thumb, deep bleeding cut, multiple paper cuts on thumb, and bone fracture. So I'm sure all of you guys know that these sound very unpleasant, but what do you guys think are, like, immediately off the bat, some of the less severe symptoms?
I think we can agree that the paper cuts are probably on the lower half. And I mean, I don't know if you guys know, but specifically having a sprained hamstring can also be really bad because depending on how severe it is, like that won't heal well. Like,
to me, in context of the rest, that seems like it might be around the middle.
because, I agree. It's like a long-term pain, but it's not like horrible. Like it doesn't feel immediately horrible. I imagine like the moment you have a bone fracture probably be really intense.
I was actually gonna say a bleeding artery was the worst.
Oh,
because that's probably the most life-threatening.
What would you say is the least severe out of these? One of the paper cuts, right?
I think it's paper cut on thumb.
Also, I feel like when it's on a thumb, it's easier to mitigate that. I hope I said that right. Or like if you have like two functioning hands, you can just use your other hand, right? But if it's like a paper cut on an eyelid, you know, you can't not blink. So I feel like you're going to be constantly irritating that.
Okay, so next is multiple paper cuts on thumb.
Yeah, I think so. Because it's still just the thumb.
Yeah,
I think that it would be paper cut on eyelid and then paper cut on lip, because think about it. Your lip, like, it moves in so many more ways.
That's true. It stretches.
It's
like
not
when you
how you talk, you eat.
Yeah.
Like you always feel it, even if you're not doing anything.
Also, I don't think there are any wrong answers.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's very subjective at this point.
So are you guys okay with me doing paper cut on eyelid and then paper cut on lip?
Yeah.
My next thought was like the rolled ankle because it's just rolled, so it's not like sprained or anything.
Yeah, that you can deal with that.
All right, I think that then deep bleeding cut would go next, because with a sprained hamstring, you probably can't really put weight on your leg.
Yeah, and it could last for a long time. I feel like the deep bleeding cut can heal relatively quickly. It really depends. And then broken bone, I suppose.
Yeah, I think broken bone.
And then what's left?
Bone fracture. Because that's just like even more broken.
And then that would be bleeding artery for the last.
Are you guys happy with that list for physical?
I
think that's pretty accurate. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, for anyone watching this, though, remember, you don't have to. It's okay if you have like completely different ranking system. Like, this is all subjective, and it's meant for discussion.
I'll read all of them. So, a few minutes of irritability, crying for hours, banging your head against a wall, hours thinking about one thing, screaming at a stranger, pacing back and forth, shaking and sweating uncontrollably, screaming at a close friend, consumed by feelings of anger for an hour, and punching a wall.
Yeah, my initial ideas are for least severe to look at the things that would not be visible to other people and not really externally expressed. So maybe a few minutes of irritability, nobody would really see that. And hours thinking about one thing, nobody would really see that.
But I do agree that
first thought was about the few minutes, like it's a
Yeah.
few minutes rather than like hours. So
Right.
Let's go with that.
And then what second?
Maybe pacing back and forth, since I feel like that can be like a pretty natural reaction to like any range of things. Like, it can be like for very small levels of stress as well as like really high levels of stress.
I just think it's difficult because like everybody has like different coping
Yeah,
mechanisms for
that's
their
true.
anger.
That's
So-
true. Everyone reacts differently to things. Yeah.
I feel like the things that are like when your emotions are so strong that they get like physical, that's probably later on.
Maybe like
Also-
consumed by feelings of anger for an hour could go after that.
I think so too, because that's like kind of getting to the threshold between feeling in control of your emotions and out of control of your emotions. Hours thinking about one thing, maybe next because it's a longer term thing.
I was thinking the shaking and sweating because I think that's more of like a faster response. So honestly, once you have like an hour, a few like that's gonna pass because you're kind of gonna be more calm.
It's like really weighing between intensity and longevity.
Right. Yeah. It's a weird balance, and like depending on who you ask, one or the other actually feels worse.
So me personally, I would put hours thinking about one thing first, but this just goes to show how different it is for everyone else. So
I also find it difficult because I feel like a lot of the times those things can go hand in hand. Yeah. Like if you're really stressed about one thing, you are likely also like shaking and sweating because you're nervous or something.
All right, next. I was thinking maybe crying for hours.
Yeah.
I think it depends on if the person is like more they take their anger out in their emotions or if they take their anger out in like punching and sometimes physically.
Would you guys agree with punching a wall first and then crying for hours?
Yeah.
Oh, also I kind of forgot. What about screaming at a stranger? I guess that would be like, because it's external, it would be next.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm very self-conscious of expressing my emotions around other people. So like it would have to be very bad for me to show it to a stranger.
Yeah, I agree.
It's harder for me to like scream at a stranger than a close friend, in my opinion. Like, as weird as that may be.
That's fair. Interesting, because I feel like it might be easier to scream at a stranger because they might be less likely to feel personally affected by your emotions. Whereas if it's a person you know, it's like some of those emotions might have more truth to them and like they feel it more. But that and that goes to show how like people vary between experiences. Interesting.
It could go either ways. I honestly think they're about equal.
Yeah, that's fair. Would we want to put banging your head against a wall before or after?
That should be last.
I think that would be last.
Yeah.
That seems like a reaction that someone would have if there were literally no other options to do with your body and what you're thinking. Like that seems like a last resort.
Yeah, it's definitely an extreme, I would say. All right, well, I think that most of us agreed on screaming at a stranger before a close friend, so I'm going to put that. And we said begging is last. So then crying for hours.
Oh, we're done. Okay.
Yeah, we did it. Good job, team.
Okay.
Woohoo!
So just to reflect on this, now I'm going to pass it on to Sebla to do the discussion questions to reflect on this activity.
All right. Now that we finished discussing like the spectrum between physical health and mental health problems and like reactions, how would you guys say that mental health and physical health are similar?
I feel like you can't acknowledge one of them without thinking of the other one too. Like they come together in a set
Right.
because I feel like a lot of the symptoms that we looked at for the physical health, those could cause a lot of mental turmoil, like if you break your leg or if you have a really deep cut. And
Mm,
when you think of like mental health and you think of that like pacing around or banging your head against the wall, they're very connected. And yeah, that's just something that I noticed.
That's an interesting way of thinking of it. I didn't really notice how intertwined they are, but I do know that a lot of people who suffer from physical illnesses, they also like experience mental health symptoms alongside the physical ones. And I also think an important thing is to acknowledge how difficult it was to organize that. It kind of took a while, and that shows that there's just so many situations that cause this to be so subjective. And so it's really important to look at it as a spectrum, just like physical health.
it's like almost a cycle kind of. Like usually like your mental health will can provide or like create physical symptoms, but your physical health can have mental health symptoms. So it's like it's really important to balance both. Moving on to the next question. What do you think might happen if you ignore symptoms that we said fall into that middle area of the spectrum? Actually, let me go back to that. So like middle symptoms such as like what we said for physical health, like a deep bleeding cut or a sprained hamstring, but like for mental health, I suppose a middle area. So that means intense, but not like super intense or super passable, would say maybe shaking uncontrollably or spending a lot of time stressing about one thing.
I think that without being really aware of the situation that you're in, it could easily worsen if you ignore it. So that's why it's so important to take care of yourself, whether it's physical or mental. So, self care for physical might include stretching or cleaning your wound, bandaging it. And for mental health, it could be being aware of your mental state. If you're shaking and sweating uncontrollably, like being aware of that so that those symptoms don't, intensify. If you practice and use mindfulness, you could actually like separate yourself from your current state and view it as just a feeling. So it all takes self care, whether it's physical or mental.
Yeah. So also, even if like your symptoms don't worsen, ignoring them for a long amount of time might lead to you normalizing it and like, oh, it's okay if I'm just constantly breaking bones, or like it's okay if I'm like repeatedly very stressed out. Those patterns can present long-term consequences that like build up into like the higher level stress or like higher level problem areas over time.
That's a great point to bring up, that it may not even worsen, but if you tell yourself like this is normal, is what this is the life I live, it can cause feelings of hopelessness or just like a lower quality of life, when really it's important to recognize that you deserve to be at your absolute healthiest. And it does take help and support to get there, but you don't have to live somewhere in the middle. You can always be on your journey to move somewhere up in the healthier side of the spectrum.
Following with that, how can you better identify where you are in any like moment on a spectrum?
Like with the activity that we just did, that just like proves that it's hard to really like gauge where you are. But I think that's something that might help us identify where we might be on a spectrum at a given time is just talking, either like if you have a therapist, like talking to them, or just like talking to your friends about something. I think that putting things into words and sharing that with another human being, even though it's hard, it can help give you a sense of validation, and that's what you need sometimes. And say that you're telling your friend about something that you didn't even think that was serious yourself. They might spark something in you that will draw your attention and help you realize that you actually need help.
Recognizing and accepting something that's bothering you is very hard to do, but it is also something that's going to help you, and that's how you're going to move forward.
And I think another important thing that you said, Jimmy, was going to another person, because Sebla, you were just talking about if you ignore what you're going through and that becomes normal, you may not have the best ability to recognize that you are not doing your best, and having some sort of external input could really help you recognize where you are on the spectrum. And I think another important strategy is to gauge your own fluctuations and how you feel, so that you are more aware of what's high and what's low for you.
Definitely by listening to your own gut, like listen to your feelings, as well as asking people who know you and care about you about, and talking to them about how you're doing. That can all lead to just being able to better understand yourself, and therefore better understand what you need in order to move forward.
So the first question here is, to help others, where on the spectrum do you need a fall? And I was thinking all the way on the left, or all the way of like being okay. People often think if you're in the middle, you still have room to help someone else. And that is actually not exactly the healthiest, because if you're putting other people in front of you, you can often actually forget about yourself, or think other people's health is more important, but it's not, because eventually you're going to run out of that energy or that ability to help other people, and then it's not going to help anyone. So you really need to take care of yourself first.
Yeah,
I really agree.
I think that's definitely true. I think it's important to think about what we're meaning by help in this situation, because I think if you're somewhere in the middle, you can still be supportive of other people and share that you care about them, but you can't really be there to bear any weight of their emotions. So it's important to know your boundaries and to really respect yourself and put yourself first.
And I also just think that what you said, Jaya, about like how eventually if you're not doing okay yourself, and then you try to extend to yourself to helping other people, how eventually you'll just drain out your reserves. I think that's really important, because sometimes if you're not doing well, like, you know, like that moment of just like helping other people will like probably feel good like temporarily in that moment, but the kind of energy that or resources that are spent doing that can ultimately just reduce time that you could have spent healing yourself, and healing that would have made you even more capable to help other people, like without hurting yourself. It's very much like, I guess it's like what we mentioned earlier about the metaphor, you know, you have to have your own mask on, like in the airplane, before trying to put someone else's mask on.
All right, the next question is, where on the spectrum should you ask for help? Any part of it, I think. People think that if they're totally fine, then they don't need to ask for help. And sometimes you might not feel like you need to, but it's always there for you, and you always can. It's not going to hurt you.
Also, I think there are like different ways to ask for help. Like maybe you don't need like a long discussion, but sometimes help can just be like spending time with someone, or just like,
Yeah, exactly.
sometimes like help can just be like, you know, going to like your regular doctor checkup, or like your regular therapist.
For me, like when I think of help, it doesn't, like Sebla said, it doesn't have to come in the form of a conversation. Like sometimes just being with a friend and just being with someone who cares about you makes you feel like your mental health issues might not be something that's so powerful over you.
Yeah, I mean, you guys pretty much summed it all up, but support systems are a really important part of maintaining mental health. And even if you're not directly asking for help, maintaining a support system, even if you're at the very like best mental health state you could be in, you could still benefit from having a strong support system.
Yeah. The last question is, where on the spectrum can you focus on growth? My first thought is you can always focus on growth because you can always go up.
Yeah, there's always ways to be better than who you were yesterday or better than who you are today.
And I think that everyone is susceptible to experiencing mental health issues. Even if you're in a good state, you never know when something could happen. And if you neglect, like if you're originally in a good mental state and you neglect maintaining that, it could easily decrease again. So I think it's really important to pay attention to yourself, and you could always improve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes growth comes when growth isn't always something that's so intentional. Like just by us overcoming our adversities that we have, whether that be with physical health or mental health, just sometimes the act of overcoming that will teach us a really valuable lesson.
That's very important. That's very important to bring up. Like sometimes it's just the experiences you have in life that let you grow.
Yeah, I mean, someone once told me that any experience, good or bad, you can learn something from it. So also to think about the other end of the spectrum where you may not be doing well at all. Even though it may feel like you're not accomplishing anything and you're at the very worst you've ever been, you're still learning things about yourself. And if you're asking for help, and if you are at least doing the first step and like acknowledging that you are not in a good place, like you are growing and you still have room to grow and there is hope. So it's really important to pay attention to both sides of the spectrum here.
That's
Yeah.
really well said.
All right, is this my cue now to wrap up? I think that you guys had really, really great things to say, and I definitely gained a lot out of this. I think it's always important to have a reminder that mental health is something that we all experience. It's something that we don't have to keep quiet about. We can all talk about it. It's never something to be ashamed of, and we're in this together. Like, you can always ask for help. You can always, you can't always offer help, but you can at least be supportive of one another. Thank you everyone for participating in this activity. We hope you learned something about the similarities between the spectrum of physical health and mental health. And stay well. Take care. Thank you.